Good afternoon. My name is Brian Thomas. I am a national account manager with TCI. I've been with TCI for almost 12 years now. Um, Prior to that, I taught social studies just north of Cincinnati, Ohio, where I live, and I taught 7th and 8th grade social studies. Um, Excited to be able to be here with you this afternoon and talk a little bit about methods for formative assessment, exciting methods for formative assessment. Now with me and helping me today is Liz Podgorski from California. So Liz, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself a little.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Liz, and I am working in the headquarters in Mountain View, California for TCI, and I am on the product and customer support team. So if you ever call or email in to TCI, I will be on the other end.
Cool beans. And I will give everyone my contact information as well as how to contact TCI at the end of my presentation. The other thing, for those of you who are watching this on demand, you should also see a link to the presentation that we're using for today's webinar. So the topic, exciting methods for formative assessment. Really, the question that I started thinking about was, how do you know when your students know something? And it really kind of takes me back as a former teacher all the way to my methods training as a university student. And of course, when you're thinking about knowledge and how students demonstrate an understanding, we really think about observation of behaviors, actions, and products. And of course, that methodology includes both formative and summative assessment, with formative being the assessment that takes place during the process of learning, and then the summative deals with the results of what was learned so that you can show what they have gained by that knowledge. Well, when you're teaching, good instruction should include a rich diversity of both formative and summative assessment. And a lot has been done in traditional education for a very long time dealing with the summative side of things. And of course, that's where all the state testing and national testing and standards and things like that are really driven. But I want to focus in on our formative assessment, because when you're in the moment and you're teaching a lesson, really want to focus in on, how do I know that they know something as I'm teaching? Because I need to make some small alterations to what I'm teaching based upon the feedback that I'm getting through my observations. So with that, think about a lesson. And for us at TCI, when we develop our science or our social studies program, we really kind of break it down into three main components. We have a preview portion of the lesson where it begins. We teach content. Now at TCI, we have not only a textbook, but we involve investigations if it's science, or activities if it's social studies, and there's always some multiple intelligence component to it. So that's where the content portion takes place. And then at the end of a lesson, what we do is we have the students process the information. So I like to joke with teachers, there's three types of kids at the end of every lesson: the ones that get it, the ones that don't get it, and the ones that don't get that they don't get it. And your idea is that you want to try to process, have the students process their information. And of course, then the end of the lesson. And that's where summative assessment takes place. Well, these three steps in between, preview, content, and process, all is where we should be using diverse ways of formative assessment with our students. Now, when you're doing formative assessment, it needs to be exciting. When I say exciting, I don't mean exciting like doing backflips exciting, although that would be kind of cool. More to the point, what I mean by exciting is that it should be interesting and intriguing to the students. It should be rigorous. It should be something that isn't necessarily something that they would do every day. It's going to challenge them. And so formative assessment needs to be exciting. So when you think about your classroom and some of the more interesting activities that you do inside your class, more than likely you're doing some formative assessment with your students. So what I'm going to do is a couple of different things with this topic today. Is first, we want to be able to give you a parting gift, a lovely parting gift. So for your library, for your professional library, we have a methods book. It's called Bring Learning Alive. And that methods book is going to give you some really great concrete ideas, some of which I'll touch on today, and others which would not be necessarily in here, but it is a great read. It's something that I would encourage you to download. So this link is going to take you right to a PDF of it where you would be able to then go ahead and print that off, anything that you see inside there. Like I said, it's really a great read, and it goes along with the topic that we're going to be focusing in on today. Having said that, I want to break down the topic today into 3 smaller chunks. So let's think about that lesson cycle, and let's look at different ways that you can do formative assessments for each of those. So for the preview, for content, for process, and let's give you some concrete ideas and give you some visualization of some of those ideas. So in the preview, which is the beginning of the lesson, one example that I like to encourage teachers to do, and we use a lot in our programs, is beginning the lesson with an image that's tied to the content that's about to be studied. And in the background here, I've got this great piece of Renaissance art. When you're using images as an opener to a lesson, if you ask questions that start with simple tasks, like what do you see in this visual, and build towards more complex types of questions, that will, for you as a teacher, allow you some insight on what prior knowledge students bring to the table. So in other words, it is a formative assessment built inside of the activity of using the visual as well as the questions. Sometimes when you're getting them into the text, if you've got a textbook, whether it's online or print, or whether it's available in both formats like what we do at TCI, when you're getting the students into the text, part of the challenge at the beginning of a lesson is being able to build their key content vocabulary and find out what words do they know and what words are going to be entirely new to them as we get into this lesson. So how do you know what they know? Well, one idea would be to actually create a word cloud from the vocabulary that's to be studied, and use it as an image, like I just described with the piece of Renaissance art there. Use it as an image and ask students what they recognize and what they don't. So let me give you a visual of what that would look like. So look at this picture right here, and we can see a silhouette of a figure, looks like pushing against something. And as we look at the words, what I would begin to ask my students are questions like this. What word do you see first? What words do you recognize and you can identify and define? What words are entirely new to you? So I'm going to ask those questions, and then I'm going to reveal to the students that what they're looking at here are all the words that make up Newton's first law of motion. And use that as an opener. By asking those questions and getting the responses from my students, I'm going to have a good idea of what vocabulary they already were aware of and what is going to be new. So what do I need to focus in on, especially there at the beginning of a lesson? So there are other ideas that you can use for the first part of a lesson that would be formative assessment. So having your students respond to analogies, or creating an entrance slip where students have to give an initial response to, say, an essential question or a compelling question, as some people like to call them. Comparing personal experiences with key concepts that you're about to study. Using TCI reading challenges. If you use our materials in our online subscriptions for the students, we build in a reading challenge. And when we build it, it was certainly built with the intent that it would be a formative assessment, and initially we were looking at the end of the lesson, so more like the process phase. However, teachers are geniuses, and one of the things that we have found and discovered is that some teachers are using our reading challenge, like, let me give you an example, one that looks a little bit like Jeopardy right here. And instead of using it at the end, they're using it at the beginning and end. And so what they will do is the teachers will assign the reading challenge to the students. They'll play the game. The scores are recorded and given to the teacher. The teacher keeps those scores and then clears out the scores and then goes through the whole lesson, several days of instruction, and near the end of the lesson, we'll reassign that same reading challenge and then compare the amount of growth that students had during the lesson. So they're using it as a formative assessment at the beginning to kind of test their prior knowledge, and then later at the end as well to be able to determine how much the students have grown through the course of that lesson. So those are some ideas around beginning your lesson and how you can use formative assessment with the preview phase of your lesson. So now we get into content, formative assessments for content. And we're talking about the meat and potatoes, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. And of course, if you're vegetarian, you probably don't like that picture. If you're vegan, you think it's gross. But if you're like I am, you're hungry now. So let me give you some examples of how you do formative assessment while you're actually teaching content. And first and foremost, what I would say is typically teachers have had students be able to take notes. And I'm not talking about like the outlines or anything like that. I would strongly suggest that teachers use graphic organizers with their students to take notes as a formative assessment with their students. So some examples would be using things like Venn diagrams or spoke diagrams, illustrated outlines, matrices, annotated images, timelines if it's something history-based, mind maps, T-charts, sensory figures. Hang on to that last one. I'll give you an example of it in just a moment. When you're thinking of graphic organizers, it needs to be more than just a place where students hang content, okay? The goal is not to just hang content on the notes. That would really be, in essence, worthless. They need to demonstrate that they are learning through that process. So graphically organized notes should show that the students are not only learning, but demonstrating understanding as well. So how can that work? Well, take, for example, this graphic organizer of a student who's been learning a little bit about Prince Ferdinand and how he became king. Now, in a sensory figure, the idea is as the students are learning about an important person, what they have to do is to research on that person, and then they have to create a sensory figure where that person's icon or caricature is in the middle, and they build around it statements that address the five senses. So for example, here the student says, I see with my wife Isabella at my side as we marry in 1469 and unite Aragon and the castle to create Spain. So this is the idea of a sensory figure. If I look at a student's notebook after I'm completed with this lesson or while they're doing it, not only will I know that, hey, they've done the research, so I clearly see they've been reading that information, but based upon what they're putting in here, I also can see that they're using empathy and they're using a lot of other multiple intelligences to demonstrate that they understand the topic much more deeply than just some surface level of knowledge and comprehension. Lesson activities, investigations is the other focus point within content where you really need to think about the type of formative assessment that you do. So let me give you a couple concrete examples again. So in our program, History Alive, the United States Through Industrialism, which is a middle school U.S. history program, as the students are learning about the American Revolution, we have a game where they go out and they play Capture the Flag. And what happens is the teacher divides the team unequally. So there is a lot of big kids on Team Red, and Team Blue isn't quite as athletic necessarily. But what happens is the teacher begins changing the rules, making it harder and harder for Team Red to win what seemed to be a surefire win at the beginning of the game to at the end, at best, hoping that they can just hang on, if not outright lose. It's this really great activity. It's body kinesthetic, and immediately following that activity, what happens is the teacher brings the students in. They do a T-chart where they focus in on all the rule changes in the game and how they relate to the American Revolution, which is what they're going to study. In the process of the lesson, as the students later read through their lesson, one of the things that they will do is they will have an annotated image in their notebook of students playing Capture the Flag, but instead of them marking in items that relate to the game, they'll be bringing in the history and annotating that image of students involved in Capture the Flag, but with points taken from U.S. history. Really great activity, and as the students go through that whole lesson, it is a formative assessment. I'll be seeing their growth and their understanding of the content through that activity into the notes. So it's not just the notes that you need to focus in on, it's also the activity. So that's a social studies example. Let me give you a science one. So in our Bring Science Alive program, third grade, Unit 4, Lesson 4, students are learning about why some members of a species survive and others don't. And what happens in this lesson is that students are broken into small groups, and they will gather around a little square. Now, the squares are either black, or they are white, or they will have a newsprint background. And the teacher has also taken fabric or paper of the same three color designs, or I should say art designs I just described. And what they'll do is they'll create little moths of each of them. So there'll be some black moths, there'll be some white moths, and then there'll be some newsprint colored moths. They'll put them on one of those colored backgrounds, and in small groups, one student will pretend to be a hummingbird, and they'll have their back turned. A teacher will yell go, and they will turn around, and they will try to pick up as many moths one at a time as they possibly can. And so after 30 seconds, or say a minute, the group will then record what moth was collected. After they do this for a series of different types of pieces of paper background, whether it's white, black, or newsprint, the students will have collected a lot of data and evidence to be able to support a hypothesis. So as they're going through that lesson, that activity, they're gathering the evidence. It is a formative assessment to be able to demonstrate for you how much they understand about that content. Exit slips. So a lot of teachers like to use exit slips as a formative assessment. The idea is that you give the students a question at the end of class, or questions at the end of class. Before they leave, they have to answer. Now, a variation of that would be something like this, where you have a one-to-one setting, kids have a device, and you're also using an LMS platform like Google Classroom or perhaps Edmodo. And what you could do is you could actually post your question there. You could even use social media platforms like Twitter, using a special hashtag that students would then use in their response to an exit slip. Or you could even make it a texit slip if the students have a mobile device and they had access to that too. So teaching strategies that you are using in the class can be varied, and they can involve good fundamental use of formative assessment. Now, I'm not going to click the video, but if you view this presentation later on, a good example of a teaching strategy that involves lots of different types of formative assessment is called a response group strategy, and you can view more of that or others on our main website if you go under what is TCI and look for theories and strategies. Let's get to the last part, formative assessments for processing. So we're at the end of the lesson. We're going to now challenge the students to do something with the information using higher order thinking skills. So it could involve poetry, flowcharts, markers, book covers, caricatures, illustrated dictionaries, journals, mosaics. There's lots of different things that you could do. One that I'm particularly fond of is cartoons, and it has a lot to do with my own interests. I love drawing cartoons. I love coming up with the idea of cartoons, and there's a lot of really great websites out there that allow students to create cartoons absolutely free. And the beauty of using cartoons, whether it's in a social studies, science, math, language arts setting, it doesn't matter. What it does is it provides the students a creative outlet where they can show their insight as to how they understand the material. The other idea that I would share with you that would be more concrete is having the students create simple models. Nothing complex. I'm not talking about like science fair type stuff or anything like that. Sometimes it can be really simple models that can be really powerful. So I found this one that I just absolutely love. Part of it is again food related because I love peanut butter. But here in this example, students create an edible cell sandwich. And so when they're learning about the cytoplasm and all the different elements of a cell, here the student uses peanut butter, they use bread, and they use edible things to create a cell sandwich. I think that's an absolutely outstanding idea, and it's really, really unique. So that's kind of the idea in formative assessment at the process level, is you want to make it individual, and you want to really challenge them to stretch what they've learned and use it in a completely new way. And that formative assessment, again, will help to determine where you go from there on in the lesson. Another idea would be picto words. where you take a term but you use images behind it or around it, or even build images into the words themselves to demonstrate that you understand what those terms mean. So for example, monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, tyranny. Here, a student has done a really excellent job of demonstrating they not only know the term but really understand what that term is about by using the images that go with it. So having said all that, we're going to close out here in just a moment, but I'm going to throw it back to Liz and see, Liz, do we have any questions there that people have posted?
Looks like your explanation was thorough, Brian. We have no questions.
Excellent. So there's opportunities to be able to get other great ideas. First, I would encourage you, definitely sign up for a 30-day trial. If this is your first opportunity to be able to hear about TCI and what we do for science or social studies, I encourage you to take us for a spin. So we have a trial on our website, and I even built in a link that will take you right there to a 30-day trial of Teach TCI. And then also, if you wanted to learn a little bit more about some of those teaching strategies that you can use in the content phase, this link right there will take you to other videos beyond just the response group. We have several others. So there's ways in which you can also get in contact with us. So you first make sure that you visit us at teachtci.com. If you have questions or you have needs or you want us to put a quote together for you, email us at info@teachtci.com. Of course, if you have a question about the content for today's webinar, I encourage you to email me or contact me, and there's a couple different ways in which you can do that. bthomas@teachtci.com. You can also send me a direct message via Twitter at Brian_ThomasTCI, or even give me a call, 877-874-7821. And with that, I want to thank Liz for her help this afternoon, and thank you all for your time today.